बहुत खुशी है कि मोन्टेक जी यहाँ आए हैं। आपके बहुत व्यस्त कार्यक्रम हैं और अनफॉर्चुनेटली उनके घुटने में भी दर्द है, लेकिन फिर भी वो आप यहाँ आए हैं, इसलिए हम बहुत आभारी हैं। जैसे मैंने कहा, ये 5 साल के बाद ये लेक्चर शुरू हो रहा है, तो आप सबका भी बहुत लोग पूछ रहे थे क्या हुआ, वो बंद कर दिया या क्या हुआ। मैंने कहा नहीं, ऐसे ही। तो आप सबके भी आभारी हैं कि आपने प्रोत्साहन किया कि इसको फिर से हम शुरू करें। जुलाई 2004 से मई 2014 तक भारत के योजना आयोग के उपाध्यक्ष रहे, जो कैबिनेट मंत्री के स्तर का पद है। 1980 के दशक के मध्य से भारत के आर्थिक सुधारों में एक प्रमुख व्यक्ति रहे हैं। आपने दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के सेंट स्टीफेंस कॉलेज से बीए ऑनर्स की डिग्री प्राप्त की। आप रोड स्कॉलर के रूप में ऑक्सफोर्ड गए और ऑक्सफोर्ड विश्वविद्यालय से अर्थशास्त्र में एमए तथा एमफिल की डिग्रियां हासिल की। आपको ऑक्सफोर्ड विश्वविद्यालय से डॉक्टर ऑफ सिविल लॉ सहित अनेक विश्वविद्यालयों से मानद डॉक्टरेट की उपाधियां प्राप्त हुई हैं। 1979 से 2001 तक के बीच आपने भारत सरकार के विभिन्न महत्वपूर्ण पदों पर कार्य किया। इनमें वित्त मंत्रालय में आर्थिक सलाहकार, प्रधानमंत्री राजीव गांधी के विशेष सचिव, वाणिज्य सचिव, आर्थिक मामलों के विभाग में सचिव, वित्त मंत्रालय में सचिव, योजना आयोग के सदस्य, प्रधानमंत्री की आर्थिक सलाहकार परिषद के सदस्य उल्लेखनीय हैं। इससे पहले हिंदुस्तान आने से पहले आप विश्व बैंक में महत्वपूर्ण पदों पर भी कार्यरत रहे। इनमें इनकम डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन डिवीजन के प्रमुख पद भी शामिल हैं। 2001 में आपको अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मुद्रा कोष IMF जो कहते हैं के नवनिर्मित स्वतंत्र मूल्यांकन कार्यालय इंडिपेंडेंट इवैल्यूएशन ऑफिस का पहला निदेशक नियुक्त किया था। इस पद पर आप 3 वर्ष तक कार्यरत रहे। आपने भारत की आर्थिक नीति सहित विकास अर्थशास्त्र के विभिन्न पहलुओं पर लिखा है। आपके लेख कई प्रतिष्ठित अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पत्रिकाओं और पुस्तकों में प्रकाशित हुए हैं। आपने रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन विद ग्रोथ एन अप्रोच टू पॉलिसी पुस्तक का संलेखन किया है। 2019 में आपकी किताब बैकस्टेज द स्टोरी ऑफ इंडिया हाई ग्रोथ ईयर्स प्रकाशित हुई। आर्थिक नीति और सार्वजनिक सेवा में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान के लिए भारत के राष्ट्रपति द्वारा 2011 में आपको देश के दूसरे सर्वोच्च नागरिक सम्मान पद्म विभूषण से सम्मानित किया गया। आजकल आप क्लाइमेट चेंज विषय पर बहुत सारे अध्ययन और काम कर रहे हैं, और वो आज लेक्चर में वो बात करेंगे क्लाइमेट चेंज, पॉलिसी चेंजेस एट द नेशनल लेवल एंड देयर इम्प्लीकेशंस एट द लोकल लेवल। मेरे फादर डी पांडे जी ने एक अपनी किताब लिखी थी, इन द सर्विस ऑफ फ्री इंडिया, मेमोइर्स ऑफ अ सिविल सर्वेंट, और उन्होंने लिखा था कि ये मेरे मरने के 5 साल बाद ये प्रकाशित हो। और मेरी सिस्टर रत्ना को उन्होंने ये अपना वो उसको सील करके छोड़ दिया था। 2021-22 में दिल्ली में उसका विमोचन हो गया था, लेकिन अल्मोड़े में हम कुछ कर नहीं सके थे। तो आज मोन्टेक जी ने वो किताब भी पढ़ी है और उन्होंने कहा कि मैं इसका विमोचन भी कर दूँगा। तो
वंडरफुल अपॉर्चुनिटी दी अल्मोड़ा आने की। वैसे तो मैं अल्मोड़ा पहले मैंने विजिट की है, लेकिन अल्मोड़ा के थ्रू एक्चुअली एक दिन अल्मोड़ा में अभी तक मैंने नहीं दिखाया, और दिस इज माय चांस, so I was really very glad that you invited me, and thank you so much for that. And you know, आने से पहले मैंने थोड़ा विकिपीडिया में चेक किया about Almora. It's normal आजकल before taking on the double check. तो काफ़ी impressive achievements हैं. इस छोटे से टाउन ने इतनी contribution की है to our history. मैंने on the political side गोविंद बल्लभ पंत जी और उनके लड़के केसी पंत जो मेरे बॉस थे प्लानिंग कमीशन में ड्यूरिंग वाजपेयी जी's government उनका किया. Not only that, but Murli Manohar Joshi, and on the other side of the spectrum, C.P. Joshi also come from Almora. So really, not only has it contributed,
one mic is enough actually.
Quite a spectrum. It reflects diversity. It's not easy, and by the way, that doesn't include the fact that Almora also produced someone who married Pakistan's first finance minister across the border. So that's quite a record, to which they've added producing B.D. Pande, who I think was he the last batch of the ICS? Okay, just second last batch, and became cabinet secretary, then became governor of West Bengal, then became governor of Punjab. Now I'm really happy that you asked me to release this book. It's a wonderful book, and I must congratulate the family for carrying out his instructions to publish the book 5 years after he passed away. You know, if you read the book, it brings out so many things which are really important to understand what makes our system tick. And I think he also brings out some of the problems. Now, I won't go into that in detail, but you know, he was governor of Punjab just before the Operation Blue Star happened, which led to very tragic consequences. But you know, when you read his account, you get the sense that he felt that while there were maybe one or two extremists on each side, by and large, it was a very peaceful situation with a good relationship between the communities. And then he gives his view on how politics sort of worsened the situation. This is a difficult issue because it's a long time ago, and he's not giving evidence, he's giving his impression. But I think it's useful for you to read that because it brings out a person very fair, very balanced, and very keen to give an objective assessment. And also a person very principled, because he didn't agree with some of the government's attitudes, and I think he offered to resign 3 times. So that's another example of where a civil servant standing by some principles can actually, even if he doesn't make an impact then, it's useful for history and future civil servants and so on to know that look, this is what happened. So I do recommend the book. It's a terrific book, and congratulations for getting it published. Well, all right, then you can pass on. I withdraw the congratulations from you and your brother Arvind and pass them on to Ratna. In fact, I call her up and say so myself. Now, अब मैंने सोचा कि मैं क्या सब्जेक्ट पे बात करूं. तो जैसे कि ललित ने बताया, पिछले 2 साल में मैं मेनली क्लाइमेट चेंज पे काम कर रहा हूँ. जब मैं सरकार में था तो फिस्कल पॉलिसी, मैक्रो पॉलिसी, स्ट्रक्चर, ऑल दैट, reforms, etc. were very important. But मुझे लगा कि most important thing that's going to affect our lives in the next 20 or 30 years, and especially for the younger people here, is going to be climate change, and whether we are going to be able to manage it, and if we can't manage it, can we at least have to minimize its damage. और मुझे लगता है कि इसकी awareness at a general level लोगों को है, but उनको ये नहीं पता कि भाई क्या होने वाला है, इसकी consequence क्या होगी और इसको prevent करने के लिए हमें क्या करना चाहिए. Now, you know, it's not just in India. All over the world, यही problem है. And generally, there's a good reason for that. You know, everything that has to be done, when the action needed is complex, there are always vested interests, political vested interests, economic vested interests. It's very difficult politically to make some of these decisions. And you know, since the bad effects will come after 20 years, it's the easiest thing to postpone. I mean, if for example, everybody was convinced that the next year is going to be a year of massive drought and huge shortage of water, etc., etc., the political system would work to prevent that. As you 1 year, 2 year, that's a reasonable horizon. If you say over 20 years, ye ho jayega, then everybody says yes, yes, ho jayega, but later on we'll see what we do. Not just in India, this is true all over the world. And actually until very recently, important people मानते भी नहीं थे कि climate change होने वाली है. I mean, even the former president of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, who may, as far as I know, become the next president also, he actually doubted climate change. He said, no, you know, there's no such thing. We don't have to worry about these things. So, at very high level, there was this approach. I think that has changed. And I think there are some of our reputed scientists from institutions that work on these issues in the audience. And actually, if I'm wrong, please correct me. But my impression is amongst the scientists there is now an awareness. I think the issue is really also that there is also an awareness that India will be one of the countries most severely affected. Because we are in the tropics. We're not the only country. All the countries in the tropics will be affected. India is one of those. So this would suggest कि अगर ये problem है और हमें इसके बारे में सोचना है carefully, so India should think very hard because we are not the ones that are going to escape this. We are going to get the worst effect of it. And I believe that, you know, internationally, this institution, ICIMOD, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD, उन्होंने एनालाइज किया है और उनकी कंक्लूजन ये है that the Himalayas, which is this whole beautiful range which you have a privileged view of every day, this will be one of the most seriously affected parts. And furthermore, if all the governments do what is necessary, and they are very far from doing it, even then, by the end of the century, almost 33% of the ice in the Himalayas will have melted by 2100. Not tomorrow, not day after, not in 10 years, but by 2100. Now, you know, we have no tradition of planning for 2100. But the fact is, this change will be phenomenal. So we must talk about it and start getting organized to see what we can do. And I think another point which is very important is that, you know, generally, people think of global warming, and that's what people react to. I mean, you can see it right now, it's quite warm, and then I'm going back to Delhi tomorrow, or Delhi mein temperature tomorrow will be 46 degrees. So, you know, global warming is uncomfortable, we think about it. But it is not just the rise in temperature, that will be bad. But the rise in temperature will trigger many other changes in the, if you like, the Earth's ecosystem. Now, what are these changes? Number one, melting of ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic and the glacial accumulation, including in the Himalayas. Rise in temperature means these will melt, is already happening in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and I think it's also happening in the Himalayas. This will increase the water in the oceans and lead to a rise in sea levels. You know, some people say that some small island countries might simply be overrun. They will be underwater, so the whole country will disappear. Now, admittedly, these are very small countries, but still, it's quite a major effect. But you know, even otherwise, in our own coastal regions, the rise in the sea level can have all kinds of damaging effects. Certainly in the Sundarbans and some of the coastal areas where we have cities very close to the coast. Furthermore, the rise in the ocean temperature will lead to changes in the movement of ocean waters, which, for example, for us, could affect the monsoon. So the monsoon is very powerfully affected by the movement of water from South America coming westward and then turning at the equator and becoming the southwest monsoon. This could be affected, and its pattern could also shift. I mean, the monsoon could, instead of coming in this way, it could come in a little bit higher up. This will make some areas get more water and other areas get less water. The other thing people say, I'm not the scientist, I'm taking their word for it, that you know, it will actually lead to, in the initial period, it will lead to an increase maybe in the total volume of precipitation, okay? But the water will be concentrated in fewer days, so you get more extreme events. And one way in which you get more extreme events is a cloudburst. Now, in Uttarakhand, you experienced a cloudburst some years ago when the Kedarnath disaster happened. And you have to remember that cloudburst is not just too much water coming. I mean, that's the problem. But a cloudburst also means that the weight of each drop of water is much larger than the normal rain. And the drop falls faster and hits the ground faster. This means that the earth is actually getting a solid battering. And when you consider that the Himalayas are a young mountain range, they are not fully stabilized yet, it will lead to a lot more washing off of soil from the Himalayas, which will have all kinds of other consequences. Certainly in the hilly areas, it increases the danger of landslides, and actually when you drive up from Pantnagar to Almora, you see some of these landslides on the way. Clearly, the increased precipitation concentrated in fewer days will increase the probability of urban flooding, because the rainwater disposal system is geared to a certain pattern and actually is not adequate even for that. We know that. Now you'll have more water in some days, so this rainwater disposal drainage system just cannot cope. And that is true for most of our cities down in the south, certainly Mumbai, certainly Chennai, and Bangalore. And this will require things that we have to do. We'll come to that later, okay? Along with the rise in temperature and humidity, there's a serious danger that we will have more pandemics. I mean, not only new diseases will come because of what you might call greater contact with the animal population, with the rise of urbanization, zoonotic diseases as they are called, but the probability of a pandemic will increase, and therefore we need to be much better prepared for it than we were last time. So that's another area of consequence. High temperatures will lower human productivity. They will also lower land productivity. And you know, the ADB has estimated that by 2100, land productivity in India might fall by 15%. So anyone dependent on land, unless something is done to counter this, this has a very, very negative effect on income. And all of this, the total effect of all of this, which will be differential for different parts of the country, could provoke unpredictable migration. You can easily have millions of people, more than normal, moving away from areas that have become less habitable to areas that are more habitable. Now, you know, if you go back into our history, this is not an unknown thing. I mean, people have said that the Mohenjo-daro, Harappa civilizations ultimately kind of died out because of climate change and people moved elsewhere. It's also nowadays thought that maybe the disappearance of Hampi was an example of the same thing. You know, I think basically just because a country, one kingdom is conquered by another kingdom, the city doesn't disappear. It just adjusts to a new thing. But Hampi just ceased to be a functioning city. And a lot of people say that climate change was important. All that that indicates is that it can force very high levels of migration, and that will put a tremendous amount of strain on our system. So these are what I would call the reasons to scare you. So in case you think, हाँ ठीक है, climate change, थोड़ा कुछ हो जाएगा, it's not that. I mean, the way things are going, a bad scenario can be really bad. So what do you conclude from that? I mean, you conclude from that look, we can't just sit around and say, भाई देखी जाएगी. We have to think very hard. What are the things we have to do? They're not easy, and I'll talk about some of them. But at the moment, I don't think we're even talking about what they are. I mean, we have got a slogan, many countries do, net zero and all that. But we do not have a clear statement that in order to do that, this and this and this and this is what we need. And that's what I want to talk about right now. Okay? Now there are two things that you have to do. एक तो है mitigation. Mitigation का मतलब ये है कि देखिए ये global warming जो हो रही है ये इसलिए हो रही है कि carbon dioxide CO2 और other greenhouse gases GHGs methane etc. इनको हम generate कर रहे हैं और atmosphere में डाल रहे हैं. Now these gases stay in the atmosphere for a very long time. I mean, carbon dioxide will be there for 1,000 years. So this means that whatever you put now is adding to the concentration. And as the concentration increases, the temperature increases. अब इसको solve करने के लिए, it is not enough to stop increasing emissions. It is because if you stop increasing emissions, you will still be having some emissions that will increase the concentration. If you want to stop the rise in the concentration, emissions have to go to zero. Now this is not an easy thing. I mean, if you look at any chart, I mean, for the world as a whole, I mean, emissions have been rising. Every country that has developed has needed energy, and energy has come dominantly from fossil fuels, and they've used fossil fuels. We were late in the process, so we got into the act a little bit late. And we're also using fossil fuels. And I think the other side of this picture is India by itself cannot solve the problem. I mean, India's emissions, CO2 plus all GHGs milake, India's emissions are only 7% of global emissions. So, unless all countries reduce emissions, this problem is not going to be solved. So therefore, mitigation and emissions reduction is critically an area for international, inter-country cooperation. That is what is going on in COP26 and COP27 and most recently COP28 and many more COPs to come. Countries get together and agree on what they're going to do. Now, this has taken a long time, and initially developing countries took the view quite reasonably that look here, we didn't cause the problem, so don't try to put any control on us, you do something yourself. They didn't do very much. now that we are seen to be a moderately serious part of the world, and our emissions are now 7% of GDP, I think everybody says, look, you can't say that I won't do anything and we are going to cut. You also have to do something. And that is why in COP26, when Western countries said they will go to net zero by 2050, our Prime Minister said, we will also go to net zero, but we'll go in 2070. This is the right thing to do. Because, it's like saying, look, we all agree, you fellows started it, you get there first, we will also join 2070. That was, and other countries also made similar pledges. We are not the only one. But COP26 in, I think it was 2021, a very important occasion, the first time that all countries, including developing countries, actually say they will go to net zero. We didn't have a detailed plan for net zero, but we at least said we're going to go to net zero. Now, last December in COP28 in UAE, progress was reviewed. कि भाई हमने agree तो किया है, but what is happening? And the short answer is that countries are trying to do what they promised, but what they promised is just not good enough. And if we stay on this path, there is no chance of meeting the global warming target. Therefore, every country has to do more. And the meeting concluded by saying, "Bhai, sab log jao wapis, and by 2025 you come back with a 10-year plan from the period 25 to 35 with full details कि आप क्या करोगे. And if you give us such a plan, then we will be able to judge, is the world on a sensible path or not." So we are at the stage now. I've recently written a paper on a strategy for managing climate change, which is on the website of my institution, Center for Social and Economic Progress, CSEP. If you go to the website, it will be the latest working paper, and it gives out a whole detail. I'm not going to summarize all that. But the important point is that on the mitigation front, there are many things that we have to do. So what are they? First, we have to increase energy efficiency of individual appliances and systems. An example of a system shift is we have to move from private transport to public transport. This is actually extremely important. Increasing the energy efficiency of motor vehicles is a small part. If you can get people to move from private transport to public transport, that will make the biggest difference. And we are at an early stage of a rising middle class. Everybody seems to have an ambition to own a car, and I can understand that. We have to persuade them that at least for work purposes, don't use your private car if you can afford it for leisure travel over the weekend. But for going to work and coming back, please use public transport. This will not be easy to do, but I think every state needs to work out how it can move forward in this area. Second, we have to shift away from using energy based on fossil fuels. That means coal and petrol and diesel, natural gas and so on, to energy from renewables. Now, renewables traditionally, of course, means hydroelectricity and nuclear. You have a lot of hydroelectricity here, some being developed. There are problems with that, but we can come to that. But the new things really are solar energy, wind energy, and energy from biomass. We have targets to get there, and I think so far we are not doing a bad job. But the important point is these targets are not enough, and we know that. So we have to strengthen the targets that we've got to see how much faster we can make the transition. Along with this, we have to electrify transport. This means both cars and buses and trains. In trains, the track is now electrified, but traction is not yet electrified because the railway is still running many diesel locomotives. So full electrification of railways would mean retiring existing diesel locomotives or converting them into electric locomotives, and then basically making the whole of the railways electrified. In addition to that, just like moving from public transport to private transport, one of the biggest things that we have to do is the railways should increase their share in freight. Now, actually, it has been steadily falling. I mean, the rail, I forget the numbers, but it's falling from well over 30% to about 27%. And basically, the railways have only concentrated on moving coal, which is a profitable business. But remember, if we are going to get out of coal in another 20 years, maybe, if we're going to get out of coal, then this whole freight part of the railways business will end. And they should really be moving general traffic, which requires them to have a very different business approach to how do you approach people, etc., etc. And they would have to, operate like a logistics firm. Instead of telling people to bring stuff to the railways, they have to have a system where, just like a logistics firm does, they will send a truck to the source of the goods, bring that to a rail junction to move most of the thing by rail, and at the other end put in a truck and go to the end point. Now these logistics firms can do this extremely well. It's very important for the railways to create an economic environment where private logistic firms will invest. And this will only happen if they feel they have a level playing field compared with Concord, which is the railways container movement. I personally think it makes sense that we should privatize Concord. It's not a strategically important thing. And if we were to privatize Concord, then private guys will compete with Concord on an equal basis. If we don't privatize, the private guys will always feel कि ये railways तो Concord को ही favor कर रहे हैं. So what time your train moves, etc., it will be differential between Concord and the private sector. That's one difficult kind of thing that we have to do. The other thing is, if you want to move away, if you want to make energy, you want to increase the efficiency of energy, then the logical thing is that the price of energy should be raised. Now this is a political hot potato. I mean, the politics is moving all towards subsidizing. This is one of the biggest problems now, for example, in promoting energy efficient fans. We've done a good job in promoting LED lighting because the government put a mass order, got these bulbs, everybody bought the bulbs, and quite a lot of the bulbs being used are LED. Now there are a lot of high efficiency fans also, but nobody wants to use them for the simple reason that if most state governments are giving free electricity to individuals, the economics of switching from a regular fan to a high efficiency fan just doesn't apply. And I think that this is, as an economist, it's very clear. Most economists would say that you should price energy and electricity at an economic price. And if you want to help the poor, which is a very commendable thing, then you give them a direct grant, pass it through their bank account. So instead of a situation where you want to lower the energy budget on the poor, give them a grant. This will allow them to decide how much electricity they want to use, having got the grant to begin with. Very, very difficult to do politically, and I've not seen anyone in any state so far willing to do that. Some of you are politicians. I urge you to think about it and think, how could you ever sneak this into the discussion? And those of you who are NGOs, you should think about it also, because the NGOs are actually the biggest opponents of any kind of energy price rationalization. They totally oppose the rise of energy pricing, and quite frankly, that's not a viable approach at all. Now, another issue that will come in is, we want to promote renewable energy, we want to promote solar, wind, etc. Now, solar and wind are not a steady source of energy. If you combine solar and wind, you can even it out a bit. But even then, there will be periods when there will be no supply and periods when there will be supply. Since the demand is a little bit more balanced, the only way you can handle this is to put in batteries so that the surplus, during the surplus period, you store the energy and then you distribute it when renewable energy is not available. That's expensive. And we find that actually to take a full account of that, then solar energy is still not competitive with coal. You will very often hear people say it has now become competitive. But that just means that when it's running, it's cheap. But since it's not running all the time, and you want energy to run all the time, and you will need batteries, if you add the cost of the batteries, then the average cost goes up, and at the moment, it's not competitive. Now, in 5 years, it may become competitive. This is the other problem in climate change. A lot of the technology will change over time. And what doesn't look feasible now will become feasible. But we can only hope for it, and I think it will happen. But we have to work out how to move in the meantime. And personally, I think many economists would say, and I agree with that we should introduce carbon tax. If we impose a carbon tax, then all what is currently renewable will become instantly a preferred source. There will be no need to pressurize people. Of course, the price of electricity will go up, but that is the higher cost that the society has to bear. If you think that you can insulate everyone from that, you're wrong. If you think you have to insulate the bottom 20%, then you're right. But then you have to provide money for that in the budget. And the carbon tax will raise money, some of which can be used to subsidize the poor. Again, this is not something that people generally accept. So don't take it from me that this is obvious. It is actually obvious to an economist. But the politician, the political leadership has to work very hard to make this possible. I don't expect anyone to say anything while an election is going on. But the election will be over on June the 4th. So in the next 5 years, before the next general election, whoever's in power, and indeed the community generally, should raise this debate so that people become aware of it. At the moment, they're not aware of it. Another issue is, for example, in the longer run, certain kinds of carbon use may not be substitutable at the moment, but they may become substitutable 20 years later. There are carbon capture systems where you capture the carbon and store it underground, quite expensive. But again, since we are now talking about going to net zero in 2070, we're really talking about planning for the next 5 decades. We should assume that there will be some technology change which will make some of these things possible. So we don't have to make industry completely independent of fossil fuels. But certainly production of electricity and transport, these should be made fossil fuel free in the next 20 years. And we should work out a detailed plan on how to do that. It's actually quite complicated, and this paper that I talked about gives you some idea. I think I'm spending too much. Oh my goodness, I have to end. Now that's mitigation. Along with mitigation, you also have a big task, which is adaptation. And adaptation just means कि भाई climate change तो हो गया है और हो रहा है, but it's not going to stop. Temperature is going to keep rising. All these rainfall changes are going to keep happening. How do we adapt? Now, I think there are several things that are critical in the adaptation. One of the most important of this is really recognize that there will be a tremendous pressure on food production and other agricultural production for 2 reasons. One is that, in order to mitigate, you have to do much more afforestation. We keep saying that, but we don't provide enough money for it. and the actual progress on afforestation is nowhere near what it was expected to be. How do you do this afforestation? The department says that maybe half of it we can do on the land we already have, where the forests are degraded, but we can improve it. But for the rest, we need new land. So where is this new land coming from? And will this new land shrink the land available for agriculture? Depends on the circumstances. You have to keep it in mind. Second thing is that we have to incentivize saving water, which is going to become scarce. And then you run into another political problem because you don't want to price water. We never actually price water itself, but we go worse by giving electricity free to farmers, which reduces the cost of extracting the water, even though they are not being charged for the water. Now again, this is a political hot potato. I don't know any political person who would be happy to say that, we have to start charging the farmers full cost of electricity. Same principle that I applied earlier needs to be thought about. If the idea is to help the farmer, give them a cash transfer rather than subsidized electricity. Similarly, it doesn't make any sense to have highly subsidized fertilizer which demands a lot of water in a period when we are getting water scarce. Again, we should get rid of the fertilizer subsidy. I'm saying all this because I'm not in government and I'm only speaking as an economist, but frankly, I think too much of our debates get clouded by the fact that all economists want to tailor everything to whatever is politically reasonable. That's quite reasonable if you're a young economist working in government. I'm not. My age justifies. I must tell the truth. How they react, I don't know. It's difficult. Okay? But I think we should recognize that the fertilizer subsidy is worsening the problem of shortage of water. Because to be able to use the fertilizer, you need a lot of water. You're unnecessarily using water. And if you were to jack up the fertilizer price and convert that into a subsidy for the farmer, the direct cash transfer, I think we can do better. We need to do a lot more work on agricultural research to develop the kind of varieties that would be both tolerant to temperature stress and also tolerant to the new kinds of pesticides that will emerge, also that would be tolerant to water stress. Now this, our agricultural research institutions, the Green Revolution and a little after. I think this is an even bigger challenge. And it's a challenge in many other ways also. We will have to be very clear that are we asking them to do this without the use of modern technology, which will involve genetic modification, and that there's a huge protest against that. I think an indigenously designed mustard, which was produced very productive, also Bengal, I think, still hasn't got clearance, but they're using it in Bangladesh and other places. So it's easy to say we must strengthen research. I think we should look underneath that to see what's the kind of scientific research that is likely to lead to payoff, and are there resistances to that. Clearly, I've mentioned already managing urban drainage. Linked to that, frankly, is the completely unplanned nature of our urbanization. Now that, you have examples of that in Almora also. I think one of the reasons is that too many of the hillside towns are not classified properly as municipalities. So the actual regulations that would normally apply don't apply. You can more or less build wherever you want. Now, frankly, if you look at what is being said by climate scientists, if we cannot introduce regulation and implement it on how urban expansion will take place. We're really walking into a major world. And believe me, you cannot resist urbanization. The notion that urbanization should not take place and people should just stay in villages, this is not feasible. Urbanization has occurred everywhere. It's occurred in India, and there's no reason why it won't occur in the hill regions also. So I think the short answer is, if it is going to be urbanized, then the building regulations have to be appropriate and properly enforced. Now, you know, one can go on, I mean, better disaster warning and preparedness, etc. The bottom line step back is we need serious work on what are we going to do for mitigation, equally serious work on what are we going to do for adaptation. All this is going to cost money. You know, in a lot of the international discussions, developing countries get together and say, okay, this is going to cost $2 trillion, somehow the world must give us $2 trillion. It's wonderful if the world did. But you know, realistically, I don't think the world is going to do it. If they do anything, it'll be for Africa. Certainly India, we are ourselves projecting is about to become a developed country. We'll get something, but we won't get anything like this. So we better find our own money to do this if we want to do it. And that is the main reason why a carbon tax comes in. I mean, a related reason why a carbon tax should be brought in is if you're going to phase out diesel and petrol, which at the moment generate a lot of revenue, you're going to lose revenue on that. The carbon tax would at least replace some of it. So I think juggling all these things together is not possible in one lecture. But those of you that want to examine it in great detail, please read it's a joint paper with my co-author, Utkarsh Patel, which is on our website. But most importantly, I look forward to your questions. Most of all, I think, please engage in a discussion in your own community on what are the difficult things we have to do. You should assume that at the level of slogans, everybody is agreed. What they're not agreed on is what is the policy that follows from the slogan, and that should be our objective. Thank you.
Climate-related issues are not politically kind of relevant, in the sense that nobody loses votes because, say, the water levels are going down all over, or the temperature, there's a drought all over the place, or there are disasters, natural disasters. So why bother about it, except at a very top level where you have to deal with an international kind of a agglomeration of people who have a certain view. So you basically go along with that, but really at the ground level, it is not really relevant.
Well, you're right in the sense that that's one advantage of the international discussions. I mean, for example, when we go back to the COP 30 or something in 2025, presumably the government of India will come out with a 10-year plan for the period 25 to 35. Okay, I don't know what it is, and I'm assuming that it will be stronger than what we have now, because that's where all the global scientific advice is. Now, when they do that, the next step would be, to my mind, say, India has to do this, but what this means is Tamil Nadu must do this, Uttarakhand must do this, Gujarat must do this, Punjab. Break it down state-wise and get some sort of a consensus among the states that yes, indeed, this is the national plan. I mean, after all, we cannot have a national target for renewable energy without breaking it down state by state. In a way, you are not using too much of CO2 dependent energy. And one of the interesting questions that hill states do raise and can raise, you are actually probably already net zero if you count the consumption, the absorption by the forest, because 65% of your forest area, of your area is forested, whereas for the country as a whole is 23%, if that. So actually, technically, all the Himalayan states could say that we need to spend a lot of money to preserve these forests, and you should pay for it. And if you were to tax each state, or tax or subsidize, you tax carbon, okay, which would mean you subsidize any state which is net carbon negative. So आप लोग तो immediately net carbon negative हो जाओगे. आप लोग मतलब you and Himachal and others also. You know, I mean, something of that kind will be necessary to bring more resources here. Otherwise, frankly, we are underestimating how much it will cost to do afforestation, especially if temperature goes up. Because you know, the ability of the leaf to absorb carbon dioxide will go down if the temperature rises. So to take care of these problems, a lot more money is needed, and that money has to come by getting rid of useless subsidies. Now, it's a political decision which useless subsidy. People may have different views. But I don't think you can take the view that all the subsidies we are giving we can afford, and we can afford all the additional stuff we need. That, quite frankly, is just not possible. And I think you need knowledgeable people, civil society, Rotary clubs, businesses, industries, etc. They should create a climate of opinion, you know.
The participation of the politicians and the bureaucrats, they make the policies, everything, fine. But what about the people? How are you involving them? They are the main stakeholders, and especially the rural areas. Are you going to them?
100% agree with you that, but you know, that is, to my mind, that has to be a job which the political leaders perform. You know, the bureaucrats can brief and so on, but it is the political leaders that have to take across this issue and persuade the rural people. That's clearly the case.
Are they doing enough?
On climate change, quite frankly, they're not even persuading the urban people. So it's a new subject. But how to do it, that's...
They have to come up.
Yeah, I agree.
If it has to succeed.
Yeah, I agree.
So about 300 years ago, Almora was a nation by itself, about 300 years ago. And some of us would have forgotten, and others may not know. Some of us would have forgotten and others may not know that 3 years ago, our nation's salutation was मुख्य ध्येय को जतन करना तबे हमारी पालना होली, which translated today means look after the environment, then only will you survive. So you just brought up an issue about mass migration. I think Uttarakhand is already facing that issue of mass migration and its association with climate change. So this has led to the to the marginalization of agriculture, and people who were interested in conserving the ecology because it ultimately affected their agriculture have moved out of the villages. So linked to this are two more issues which the Himalayas face. One is that of forest fires. It is as yet an unaddressed issue. Again, while you said we were carbon negative, I think when you see the jungles go up, the carbon negative would turn to carbon
gold. Carbon gold.
And the second associated issue, sir, since you have had a larger study on this, is there an effect of light pollution and sound pollution on global warming?
As far as sound pollution is concerned, I'm not knowledgeable, but I've not heard this before. Mind you, sound pollution is affecting all our lives because, too much sound, too much TV, this, that, the other. Light pollution, I don't know, but one of the interesting things here is that some of the mechanisms work in a manner which we don't fully understand. I mean, I discovered recently from something which I read that, when you throw up carbon burning, you lead to these black particles. Now, these particles settle on the snow.
Cause faster melting.
That increases the rate of melting.
Yes.
because the way it absorbs sun, etc. So I don't know if that answers the question, but all I can say is that we have to, fortunately, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 4,000 scientists around the world, all pooling their knowledge, with some of our chaps are also there. That's a huge amount of information that they've collected. And let me say that what I'm saying, I think, most of them would agree with. Then they would say, well, I know it's politically difficult, but that's why you are in politics, you work it out. And I'm afraid there's no alternative. Look, politicians, it's unfair to think that politicians will solve these problems as it were spontaneously. I mean, you have to create a greater awareness on the part of the public. I think the younger people, I don't know, for example, when a politician goes to make a speech, if he were to find, or if she were to find, that 20, 30 young people are asking the question, what are you doing about climate change? This affects my future. You're not going to be there. I mean, for most politicians, they're much older. What are you going to do about this? I think they'll begin to think and say, what is the solution? At the moment, you cannot blame the politician at all. Because we have not created an environment in which they are made to see this as a problem.
Address the point that the temperature rising is triggering the other issues like that. We are very rich on ideas, but very poor in practices. Whatever theoretically you are agreed on the paper, diametrically you are doing the opposite. The hilly areas, the mountain areas, they are seismologically zone 104, and they are using earth movers and all these big machines over there. So how you are going to address this?
No, a fair point. But earth movers at the moment cannot be electrified. So if you need earth movers, I'm afraid for another 10 plus years, maybe green hydrogen at some point will make that possible. But heavy truck movement, heavy road movement at the moment really cannot be converted to electricity. But remember, this is not a case where we have to solve every problem today. I think I've said that, industry, heavy freight movement, air movement, ships, these things will come a little later. Meanwhile, lots of research is being done. And a lot of this research is being done in developed countries. That will help us. Let them find solutions. But we have to find solutions for what we have to do. And for that, solar, renewable energy, shift to public transport, move away from road to rail, these are the things in the short run that we have to do. And remember, to do each of these things, we may have to change the way we operate quite a bit. I mean, for example, if you move to greater reliance on renewable energy, then the variability of supply will increase. If the variability of supply increases, we should move to more variable pricing, including time of day variation. And consumers must be willing to pay higher prices in non-peak periods and benefit from lower prices in peak periods. Now this will require total rethinking of how state electricity boards work, etc., etc. But it's only if this is debated in our various institutions, amongst the public, that these guys will begin to respond. I think we also need to know what others are doing. I mean, if other countries are doing it and we are not, then clearly...
Rise in population has been a continuous process in our country.
Yes.
And it is affecting on many factors, multiple ways, affecting resources also. So what will be its impact on climate change? Can you think that carbon tax can be put on the persons who are producing more children, and some benefit to the persons who produce less children?
We need to do a lot of hard work on that. But I mean, my limited point that I'm making is there is a typical, particularly amongst the elite, this population thing always comes up. That, you know, if only population growth wasn't there. I agree, if we had grown more slowly, it would have been better. But I don't believe that the Chinese made a big mistake by this one-child policy.
Now they are
Whatever you do, you have to do these things gradually. We should have done more, but it's happening. I mean, look, all over southern India, the fertility rate is below replacement. In northern India, it's not, but even in northern India, it's coming down. So the country is on track for falling fertility, and according to the UN demographic projections, that's what they say, we're going to run out of our demographic dividend within 20 years. After 2040, we will not have, we will actually have a falling population. We may still have a slightly rising labor force because it's young, but the population bogey is over now.
You have touched about the agriculture research and challenges are much more there. We have been discussing for a long time that we should increase the investment in R&D.
Yeah.
If we see the developed countries, we are only spending only 0.3%, and they are spending around 3% of their GDP. So now you are out of the government. What are the major reasons why can't we increase this investment so that we can get the solutions? Getting these solutions for these change conditions, they require additional infrastructure, additional inputs, those kind of things. I just want to know your opinion.
You want me to outline the third? No, I'm sure that whoever is doing this in the government must be working these things out. It is true that we are not investing enough in research, and particularly in a world which is going digital, where AI is becoming very important. AI is going to affect productivity. We have a basic potential in this area, but you know, our problem is that first, there are two problems. One is most of our research is done by the government. The private sector is doing a lousy job. In the sense that as a percent of GDP, the private sector investment in research is very, very low. And I think our industry giants should be told that, look, you come out very bad in this, you know. We should say that. The problem is that government's research is most of that goes into atomic energy, ISRO and DRDO. It is not going into these other things. The third problem is that the quality of the degree of flexibility that we are providing our agricultural research institutions, and also the flexibility in recruiting the right staff, etc. There is a perception in the world that the quality of agricultural research in India has deteriorated. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not competent to judge. But you know, I would say that in terms of coming up with varieties that respond to these challenges, we haven't done that. I mean, take Pusa 44 or whatever it was, the rice. It's a disaster. And it's only very recently that the Punjab government has said, no, don't sow this rice because it's absorbs so much water. We should never have released it. Now, unfortunately, we're not being suitably selected. There's been a lot of work being done on SRI, System of Rice Intensification. Don't do this flooding of rice fields. Just put in the thing and it will grow. Greatly reduce methane generation. But somehow the agricultural, both the research side and even more important, the extension side, is simply running down. And now we're moving into a world of climate change. These institutions need to be hugely strengthened. This is not just a central government matter, this is a state government matter. And actually states should compete with each other. I mean, you can't expect all states will do the same thing, but I wish I could say that these two states have done an outstanding job on agricultural research.
आप समय में गागर में सागर बढ़ती है, starting from the global impact to regional impact and local impact. Sir, as being a student of geography and hydrology, what I perceive regarding the impact of climate change in local area where we are sitting right now, the most sensitive cycles of nature are handled being affected very badly in this area which I have seen. Like an example, in Uttarakhand we have two cycles. One that by the glaciers, another set where we have 40% of area of Uttarakhand. These are non-glacial fed rivers. These are rain-fed or groundwater fed rivers. And all in the 40% area where about 75% of villages are lying in this area is suffering from acute water crisis. And I see that within the next 10 and 15 years, you gave the example of Mohenjo-daro, we are pushing the same thing. Because the evidence of that, the flow, lean flow, the base flow of the rivers, which I monitored in 1990 to 30 years back, of this particular Kosi river, that was 790 liters per second. And now, up to 2020, it dropped down 58 liters per second. About 16% change drop in base flow. It is not the story of the Kosi river. It is the story of all the non-glacial rivers of Uttarakhand. It may be Suyar, it may be Gagaz, it may be Nahi, Garhwal, Eastern Nahar, Western Nahar, everything. But I'm worried what will happen. If no serious river regenerating measures are taken, then I see that within the next 15 or 20 years there will be no water during summer in all the rivers. So it is a very important question which I would like to take in your notice. Because right now we have not only any policy for river rejuvenation itself, we have a lot of policy for water conservation, but how to rejuvenate a river, that is a very million or million.
No, I completely agree.
So we need a strategy for how to rejuvenate the rivers of this Malay.
But I'm not the competent person. But I agree with you. We don't have a strategy.
Right.
My colleague Mir Shah, who was a member of the Planning Commission, set up. The government had asked him to form a group. What can we do on water, etc. They wrote a long report. It must be sitting in somebody's desk. But I think this is not an area that we have come up with a really good. Now, there's a problem, and the problem really is that we don't have a mechanism for enforcing across states a discipline on how to handle rivers. And that's a constitutional lacuna. So even today, Tamil Nadu is fighting with Kerala on the Mullaperiyar Dam, etc. We've done a bad job on that. Actually, I wish maybe you can work on this for the next election. That all the parties in their manifesto should say, what do you want to do on this? Look, if the idea is to move everybody, then I don't believe that the wisdom will come only from the politicians. There must be pressure from the electorate saying, look, this is what we want you to do. And from young people, schools, universities.
There are two aspects to climate change. One is the natural. It's a cyclical change which is bound to happen, about which we cannot do anything. The second part of it is the anthropogenic factors, where we have a role to play, and in that he's suggested certain strategies. I was talking about the seminar on impact of climate change. The same NGO about a fortnight back held a seminar on public transport vis-a-vis the private transport in the urban areas. Because the urban challenge is you have the advantage of aggregation of economies, and the externalities are the congestion. So how do you work out? And as far as urbanization is there, it is bound to happen. Ball and Lin had written about the developing economies and urbanizations, and we say India has been very slow to urbanize compared to other nations. So urbanization is going to stay, migration is bound to be there. Whatever we may say politically, it may not be correct to say that we'll hold people, provide them livelihood in wherever they are staying. It is not possible. This is my personal view. It is bound to happen. The thing is, how do we manage it skillfully? And same holds true for, I think, climate change and environmental concerns. What kind of adaptation strategies can be there? What kind of mitigation strategies be there? At the state level, I would just like to apprise you, because from whatever I could gather, there is already a state level committee for climate change. In fact, a state level framework to deal with the climate change has already been formulated. And it recognizes that Himalayan states are more vulnerable. There's been a vulnerability analysis and risk assessment up to the block level. So, for example, for Uttarakhand, there are 95 development blocks. For each block, this assessment has been done. The sectors which have been taken up are the forests, agriculture, water, and health. Livelihoods, somehow, as of date, there is no data. What is really happening to livelihood because of the environmental change? There are 2 or 3 very good reports. One was the deliberations of a seminar conducted by another NGO called CEDAR, which has gone into details of these things. Another is a study which was sponsored by Indian Council of Agricultural Research along with Padma University. They have specifically gone into the agriculture sector and livelihood concerns along with for agriculture and in the rural areas. There have been very few studies for the urban areas. So I think the other thing which Dr. Ahluwalia mentioned, that when we talk of nature, it's a whole, it's an organic whole. So any event anywhere may trigger another event elsewhere. When we talk of Himalayas, the water towers, recession of the glaciers, it may lead to flooding of rivers. Cloudburst leads to erosion of the soil. So these are new phenomena. Brown haze phenomena. Mr. Ranjan Joshi is sitting here. He had sent me a mail when Kedarnath disaster took place. There were some studies in NASA about brown haze phenomena. They were not very sure as to what causes it, but it is there. So these are areas where climate change has led to what we call phenological changes, early fruiting in the trees, movement of species from lower regions to the higher regions, invasive species coming in, the likelihood of new viruses coming in. So these are issues which I think, and here international collaboration will be very important, and in certain areas, especially in health systems, there is something called Cochrane collaboration. So these collaborative arrangements, networking with institutions elsewhere are bound to come, and today we are talking in terms of evidence-based planning. Where does the evidence come from? Evidence comes from laboratories, both domestically, globally. And this is an issue where we will have to think both in the global terms, because we call it the global warming, and as well as what are going to be the regional implications, what are going to be both at the macro level and the micro level, what are going to be the implications. And I think in course of time, as he suggested, recently the Ministry of Finance had published an overview of Indian economy. So 3 major challenges they said in the economy. One was the energy transition, as he mentioned, that moving towards from fossil fuel energy towards the greener options. Nobody talked of green hydrogen till about 2 years back. Today we are talking in terms of green hydrogen and other possible alternatives, other possible options. So I don't know how far technology will be helpful, but these are the issues which now need to be debated, and debated with in a very open and candid manner. Whether it is what is sustainable, what is doable, and what is practicable. I think these are very important issues, and what kind of coping up strategies have to be adopted. I think this is the debate, I think, has started now. In most of the devolution formula also, this becomes environment has become an important criteria. So these are the issues which I think in times to come are going to be very important issues. This has to be thought of in a long-term perspective. What are going to be the short-term implications? What are going to be the short-term and medium-term sacrifices, that also I think becomes issue for a political debate. I think it's been very heartening to have you here and listen to your views. I think because this is one issue which is very, very important, in times to come is going to be still more important. Thank you very much.